and thank you for inviting me here to talk to you all. It was really great to hear all of the experiences and the ways you all are using real-world evidence. And the way Raft we've really probably started with that as a premise. How do we get more information to help patients? Just a little background on ISPOR. It's the Professional Society for Health Economics and Outcomes Research. We have about 20,000 individual members around the world. A lot of those members participate directly in local chapters as well. We hold two annual meetings each year, one in North America, which is coming up in a couple of weeks in New Orleans, one in Europe at the beginning of November every year, and then we trade off in going to Asia or Latin America. So this year in September we'll be in Bogota, and next year we'll be in South Korea. So I invite you, if any of this is interesting to you, you can certainly go to our website, ispor.org, and look at a lot of our information. We have our past meeting content up there, information about our special interest groups, which include experts that specialize in not only real-world evidence, but value frameworks and economic evaluation, patient-reported outcomes. We certainly have a large population of members that are patient advocates as well, and or the advocate groups. And I believe someone from Raft will be coming to our patient roundtable.
Two people from Raft.
Two people, yeah. So let me know if any of this is really, if you want any more information, I'm happy to talk to you. So I know you all are well versed in this type of information, so I'm not going to go too deep, but I do want to talk about kind of some of the real promise, which we've already seen and you enumerated so well about real-world evidence and how important it is. But sort of also put it in the context that there's some limitations to it, and we just need to be aware of that. And when we're talking about these data, we want the totality of evidence. We're not replacing clinical trials. We're trying to supplement, augment, and really get the patient experience. So what is real-world data, real-world evidence? It can be retrospective or prospective. We talked today a lot about prospective data collection that you all are doing with patients. Active registries, observational studies, even early access programs. Oftentimes, pharmaceutical companies will put out as before drugs are even approved. But it can also come from electronic health records or healthcare claims, or data collected from charts where you prospectively go in and actually collect the data directly and put it into case report forms. And this retrospective data, often we're analyzing data for purposes that it was not originally intended. So when you're collecting data for insurance purposes, it's not necessarily giving you information that you need to understand a patient experience. So we just need to keep that in mind as we are looking at these different types of data. And we might even be able to retrospectively analyze clinical trial data. So there's some issues that will travel along with that we need to be aware of, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that later. So how does observational research or real-world evidence differ from clinical trials? This is just a schematic I pulled from the source here at the bottom, Roche et al. So when you go from along the x-axis, study design, it's constrained versus very open or free, and on the y-axis, the patient population very narrow to broad. You can see observational studies are up there in the right-hand corner, and that can give us a lot of information that you don't normally get from a clinical trial, and there's specific reasons why you put your study collection in one corner or the other. Clinical trials are very good at giving us information under very controlled settings to answer very specific questions, but often we need to understand a broader group of information to answer questions that those clinical trials just don't give us the answers to. And there is some trade-offs, so as you move to that upper right-hand corner, you're sort of trading off on internal validity, so there's reasons you've chosen certain patient populations or to collect certain data that give you a really good and robust answers, but it's not very generalizable, so you really need to understand a broader patient population, and that's some of the power of that observational data. So why do we need real-world evidence? And I think I'm sort of preaching to the converted here. We know why we need it, but just to kind of remind ourselves, clinical trials, like I said, are very good at answering through efficacy question. Does it work in a narrowly defined patient population under very controlled conditions versus placebo or one active comparator, and for the duration of that trial, which often doesn't tell you the full complement of the survival data that was so interestingly shown earlier today from some of the data that Raft collects. And it does talk about safety. We're talking about benefit risk, but often those are side effects that are known. The trials are powered to understand the efficacy. You're capturing information about the safety profile, the adverse effects that are really well known to the company because when you have a smaller patient population, you're not going to collect information about side effects that might be very rare or might pop up. So there's some things there that you just need to put into context. So what does real-world evidence answer? This is the effectiveness question. Does it work in practice? Does it work under real-world conditions where a doctor is going to prescribe it to a patient that might not be specifically defined by the inclusion criteria of a clinical trial? These are not controlled conditions. Patients are going to come when they can get to the clinic. They're not going to show up every 3 weeks. They're not going to, be questioned ad nauseum about how often did they take their drugs, did they take it exactly on time, was there some day that they didn't take it, and then over the long term, like I mentioned, how do these treatments perform beyond, say, the 12 to 18 months that a clinical trial might run, and versus other standards of care. So we know doctors are using many different treatments, and when you go back and collect these data, you have the opportunity to see how they're performing. And is it safe in practice? So, we know sometimes patients don't even report a side effect to their physician because they might be afraid they're taking off their medication. So in order to understand the safety, it's a little bit different in real world data. If you just comb through a healthcare record over, a physician practice, what we found is much lower reports of known side effects that are, when you compare it to the package insert and data that was collected in a clinical trial. So while we're collecting safety data, we have to be a little cognizant of exactly how and where you're getting that information, and to make sure that you're really collecting the right type of information. It may even come up with unknown side effects, which is why we have, the manufacturers are often encouraging physicians and patients even to call them and tell them if they have an effect that they think might be due to the medication, because there might be something out there that we didn't even know about. We can understand adherence and treatment patterns. When are patients taking medication? At what dosage are they really taking it? Is there something that is affecting their ability to take the medication? All those things are not answered by a clinical trial because it's a very specified and controlled condition, and this is information we can get in the real world. We can also understand the cost of the treatment. We can understand the cost offset from the treatment. We can understand the cost of treating the side effect or the adverse event. What is the patient really experiencing when they have those sorts of effects, and how are they treated? And, that goes off the bottom of the slide here. We talk about quality of life and tolerability. And really, that type of information is not very well collected in a clinical trial setting. It's often, when it is collected at specific time intervals that might not be related to the side effect the patient is experiencing, which is really when you want to know. The symptom, it could be masquerading as a side effect, but really a symptom of the disease. You really need to understand how the patient is feeling and how important they think those issues are to them, because the doctor's really concerned about a side effect that is labor intensive for them to treat. They need to get at it soon. They need to give the patient a certain amount of drug or get them hospitalized. But to the patient, they might be more worried about their hand-foot syndrome or something. I'm sort of making something up, but to them, that's not the most important thing. So it really is important to understand the patient perspective around all of these things. So where is real-world evidence being used? I mean, we know it's being used right here in this very room. But manufacturers are looking at real-world evidence to understand or to identify new targets for drug development or drug development pathways. The FDA is definitely using real-world evidence to monitor drug safety post-approval, the Sentinel initiative. The EMA is also using post-approval observational studies to look at safety and is requiring that. Payers are often using real-world data to try to understand the size of the patient population that they will be at risk for paying for. So they're interested in epidemiological data, how many patients they have that would be covered, what other patients that are not part of the initial indication might be given this drug is also important to them. And then once they've made these coverage decisions, reassessing over time to see are the drugs living up to their promise and potential that they agreed with the original manufacturer when they decided to cover. Outcomes-based contracting. We are seeing, and I'll give a couple examples in the next slide, you know, if you could cover a drug that only has 12 months of follow-up to see how patients really do over longer terms, so you're covering the drug, you're following the patients together with the manufacturer, is it living up? You know, maybe it's doing even better than you thought it might. So there's a lot of opportunity to use real-world data collection to continue to follow patients over time to understand how they really are doing in the real world. And then regulatory approval decisions. This is coming. It is coming to us, you know, now. So I put up here the example of Pfizer that used real-world data to score Ibrance breast cancer, not in males. So there's not a lot of males in breast cancer trials, but they do get breast cancer. So this is how they got the indication, by collecting data in real-world usage over time. We know the FDA is already using real-world evidence to make decisions about medical devices. We know under 21st Century Cures that they were required to come up with a framework of how they're going to use real-world evidence in practice and coverage. So their framework came out at the end of last year. We know the NHS in England, they've revamped their cancer drugs fund. So now it's almost like a coverage with evidence determination. So if a drug isn't limboing under their cost-effectiveness threshold, can we still cover it and collect information to see if it's really going to, you know, be worthwhile? And now we can see CMS, and I just pulled this, you can see February 15, 2019, proposes coverage with evidence determination for CAR T therapy. So again, these are expensive drugs that have a huge potential to offer curative therapy, but it's a one and done. You give the patient, and then you have to sit back and see how did it work. How do you pay for that? How do you know, especially in the U.S., in the private healthcare system, where a patient might spend 2 years in an insurance system and then go to the next one. But yet, Aetna paid for their CAR T, but now United Healthcare is getting all the benefit of that patient being cured. So this is more of a U.S. specific problem, but I think, you know, these are places that real-world evidence could really be impactful, and is impactful right now. So, the promise. Now we've got the challenges. What are some of the challenges that people see with real-world evidence? You know, I think there's a lot of data out there. The data comes from a lot of different places. Is it reliable? Is it trustworthy? Do we know where it came from? How was it analyzed? I think there's a lot of questions, and rightfully so, to be asked about these data. So I'm not saying we don't use the data, but we certainly have to put it into context. So this, you know, traditional clinical trialists and biostatisticians sort of think of real-world evidence like this. It's a spinner, it's random chance, or, you know, you could be saying, you know, I'm just going to pick this, because somebody could say, look at the data that you gave, oh, knowing your mutation status or not knowing your mutation status has effect on your survival. Well, how will knowing a fact affect your survival? Like, what's behind that? So you have to put, you know what I mean? That's like a spurious causal thing that we have to sort of put into context. And I'm not saying you aren't going to do that, but if somebody just puts a headline up in the New York Times and says, knowing your mutation status can influence your survival, you'd be like, oh, so I just get a test and I'm going to live longer. No, that's not really what happens.
That's the national patient laughing.
So these are the types of things that people say about real-world evidence. So this is why we need to just be aware of where the holes are. If we can poke the holes ourselves and then work with people to solve the answer, which I'll get to in a minute, that's fine. But no real-world evidence discussion can be had now without talking about artificial intelligence, because there is so much information out there, doctor's notes, discharge summaries, social media, data from apps, your Fitbit, all this stuff is out there, and it could be really valuable to put it all together. But in order to do that, you need a computer. I mean, we just don't have enough computing power these days, and just within our minds, to understand this. You really need the computer algorithms to churn through and try to find some trends in these data for you. But you know, even as a real-world evidence proponent, what is that computer going to spit out? And what didn't they tell me that I might wanted to have known? So I think there is some skepticism in understanding exactly what these computer algorithms really can get for us. But, it's exciting times because Target and Walmart are already doing this, well, all of our data anyway, and they're finding, interesting trends that they're targeting you all with, emails, mailing, and ads online. So it is coming for us. So what are some of the challenges, and I'll preface this by saying I am not a biostatistician, and maybe you're all breathing a sigh of relief. I'm not going to go too deeply into some of this, but it is important, places where people can say, well, how reliable is real-world evidence, and can we really believe it? So in terms of bias and confounding, when we have real-world evidence, people are self-selecting in a sense. So if you think about people coming to this IDQ, are they different than somebody who's not joining? If someone has access to the internet, other people don't, are they fundamentally a different patient? And does that make you have different answers to your questions just because patients are selected in ways that from a clinical trial, you're randomly selecting, you're selecting patients, you're blinding them to the treatment and randomly assigning, which takes care of some of this bias that I'm talking about here. So I'm not going to go any deeper than that. And then reporting bias, which is also a problem with clinical trials, but can you selectively pull out those, outputs that you want, and those are the ones that you report and publish. And that's also an issue for clinical trials, but if we have a place where people can put out their studies so that people understand what's being studied and then are kind of forced to put the results, then that gives us a better idea of the totality of data that's out there and actually what other studies are being done. Incomplete data is an issue with real-world evidence. I talked a little bit about underreporting diagnoses or adverse events or side effects, missing data. So if you're looking at healthcare claims, you're collecting information that gives you a lot of information about the patient, but not what actually happened to them as a result of what resources they use. The electronic health record, a lot of the information is mostly for insurance purposes and not very useful to what we're trying to parse out in terms of how the patients are feeling or what's really happening to them. And a lot of that is captured in like these unstructured notes, which the AI algorithms can help us get to, or machine learning, but again, we're not there yet. Relying on self-submitted data can create gaps. Not everybody will answer all the questions. What if somebody help them answer the question? Some of this, is questions that the biostatisticians will ask, and then there could be systemic misclassification. So if you're using, say, a health, looking at how things are coded in the system, they might be using a different code in different places and call it something a little different, and then you completely miss those patients just because they're not classified correctly. So some mitigation might be, strict reporting guidelines or linking data sets together so you can get that missing piece of information from somewhere else. And we'll talk a little bit about how linking and privacy can be an issue as well. So data mining or data dredging, what is this? So when you have a standing data set, so you collect all the information, you've got the data, it's here, now you're going to do something with it. You'd be like, I wonder how patients look who have foot syndrome. Let's look at all those patients. Or how do all the females do? How do all the males? You're kind of looking for an outcome before you even have a question. And so that, I'm not saying people do this, and there aren't reasons to understand your patient population before you analyze the data, but it's something that people will say, oh, well, you just went through and picked the result that you wanted, and that's the only thing that we saw out of this data. Yeah, exactly. Where's the significant data? And that's what I'm going to report.
And that never happens.
Ever.
No. And I mean, this is, we're not saying people start out doing this, but it kind of could happen over time and is a concern. So also, repeat analyses using different modeling approaches. You're, again, searching for that p-value. Are people doing these and non-disclosure of the unexpected results, like, oh, that doesn't fit with my research hypothesis, so I'm not going to report that one. So what can we do? A priori protocol. So make a protocol and analysis plan ahead of time once you know you have the right data set. Have well-defined research questions, and really try to show everything that you've done and be transparent with your data. Access to data is a problem. In the U.S., this is a problem. I'm sure other people have similar issues, and you can tell us all about them next. But the outpatient data is not with the inpatient data. The specialists and the internists and the labs and the imaging, the apps, the wearables are all in all these different silos. And thanks to our privacy regulations, we can't very easily link them all together and make sure that this patient is linked to that lab result and their mutation status and then their healthcare claims that shows exactly what health resources they've used. Privacy regulations are catching up, but really it's a trade-off between protection of information and informing real-world research. And to be honest, like, I tried to get my healthcare record recently, like HIPAA protected me from getting my health record. How is that helpful to me? It's my data. I should be able to say what I want to do with it. So I think there's, we're offering GPDR, HIPAA is still there. We'll see what happens, but clearly there's going to have to be some catch up with all of this. And then lack of standards. So universally accepted standards and principles are needed around the design, the analysis, the reporting. All of these things can help make sure that people understand exactly what's been done with the data, how it was analyzed, and what you wanted to do at the beginning and did it follow through to the end, so that really you do understand how to put these types of studies in that totality and hierarchy of evidence, because we're not replacing, we're just trying to augment. So this is my conclusion. There's a lot of practice wearable data. We're seeing it already. You guys are living it clearly from what you all told. The rise of artificial intelligence and these linked extra huge data sets can give us a lot of information. You just have to be aware and be ready to understand what it can and can't do, and what questions we need to ask. And then the real key is knowing the strengths and challenges associated, designing rigorous data collection and analysis plans as much as possible, and being transparent, so that people will understand, and you can have a discussion about the data that isn't just like, well, I can't look at this because it's I don't even understand what you did and I'm not sure I can trust it. So that's not where we want to be. We want this all these data to come together because it's going to be so important and has been impactful clearly for you all already. So that's it for me.
We're going to handle questions in this next session also.